everybody, so we're going to be looking at how do we do fraction operations. We're going to look at how do we add, subtract, multiply, and divide fractions. So let's begin with what's a fraction and what are the parts of a fraction. So if I have a fraction, there are two parts. We've got A, which on the top is our numerator, and we have B on the bottom, which is our denominator. An easy way to remember that is numerator north, denominator down. Okay, the numerator is, in a division problem, what we're dividing. And B, the denominator, is what we're dividing it by. So a fraction is essentially division. Sometimes we call this the fraction bar. Is also, it's think of it as division. Okay, so adding and subtracting fractions, let's start with that. So the first thing you need to keep in mind with adding and subtracting fractions is that you need to have common denominators. If the denominators are different, then we're going to have to go through the process of finding them and making them into a common denominator. If they are the same, then you're going to just add and subtract the numerators and keep the denominator. But what if they're not the same? If they're different, you're going to have to find a common denominator and then multiply the top and the bottom by the number that changes each denominator into that common denominator. So it'll be different for each fraction. Then you can add or subtract the numerators. And then last step, if necessary, simplify. We always want to simplify our fractions or reduce our fractions. Okay, if you need to pause the video at any time to write any of that down, go ahead and do so. Okay, so before we get to examples, let's talk about finding the lowest common denominator. One strategy can be to just find a common denominator where you multiply the denominators together, and that will give you a common denominator. It won't necessarily be the lowest one, and that could mean that your numbers are getting huge. So it's an effective strategy, but it's sometimes not the best strategy because of the size of the numbers. So if you remember what a lowest common multiple is, then you know what a lowest common denominator is. It's the same thing, okay? So LCD equals LCM. Now, if you don't remember how to find a lowest common multiple, here's your steps. Make a multiple list for each denominator. So you're going to have to multiply. Okay. Find the lowest common number in each list. Whoops, turn to green. Okay, so let's start with some examples of finding the lowest common multiple or lowest common denominator. Let's start with, let's say I have a fraction of 8 out of 15 minus 2 out of, we'll say 25. Here's how we can make multiple lists. So multiple lists, let's start with 15. This is the first denominator. 15 times 1 is 15. 15 times 2 is 30. 15 times 3 is 45. Now, you can, if you don't know your multiples, you can just repeatedly add another another 15 to each. But that's essentially what's happening. Start with a 15 and then add a 15 and then add a 15 and then keep adding 15. Okay? So then that'd be 60, 75, 90, and then eventually, maybe we'll stop. We can come back to it if we need to. So now I'm going to do a multiple list for 25. Okay, so think quarters when you think 25. So 25 times 1, 25 times 2, 25 times 3. And I found one. I found a common denominator. It is 75. Okay, so let's, now that we know the common denominator, let's do some examples over here for adding and subtracting. First thing we want to do is let's just do an example where we have a common denominator. So say example A, let's say we have 17 out of 20 plus 13 out of 20. Since we have a common denominator of 20, okay, we've got 20 and 20. We just need to add the numerators. So we're going to do 17 plus 13, which is 30 out of 20. Notice the 20 didn't change. Now we can simplify this. 30 is 3 times 10, and 20 is 2 times 10. And the 10s, since they're both multiplying, are just going to cancel to become just like 1. So we can really say the answer is 3 over 2. All right, now let's do an example where we have different denominators. Let's do the example we did on the right for finding the common denominator. 8/15 minus 2 over 25. So we know the common denominator is 75. How do I get the 75s? We need to multiply by whatever number would make the 15 into the 75. Okay, so I'm going to write this out again, but space it out so I can show you the steps. And actually with your multiple list, you can see how many times does 15 go into 75. You can count how many numbers it took you until you got there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 15 times 5 is 75. So that's what I need to multiply the top and the bottom of this one by a 5. What I'm really doing is I'm multiplying it by a 1, which doesn't change the value of the number. It's just going to make it look different. So when I do that, that gives me 40. 8 times 5 is 40 over 75. So this gave me this. They are equivalent to each other. It's like unreducing the fraction. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing for the other one. 25 times what gives you 75? That was 3. So we're going to multiply by 3 over 3. And that gives me 6 over 75. And then I'm going to subtract. So 40 minus 6 is 34. And then divide it by 75. And then I don't think that simplifies. 34 is like 2 times 17, and neither of those numbers goes into 75. So that's our answer. All right. Before we move on to multiplication and division, if you need to look back at addition and subtraction and common denominators, pause the video. We're going to move on to multiplying and dividing. Multiplying and dividing are easier because no common denominator is necessary. Okay, so I'm just going to write no LCD, no LCD. That makes them a lot easier. Okay, so let's talk about multiplying fractions. There's 2 things we need to do. We need to simplify and multiply across. You can do those in either order, but I suggest you simplify first so that you don't end up with large numbers. So I say simplify or cross cancel. That's where you find a common factor diagonally and then get rid of it and then multiply across. You can switch it around. So I'll say or. You can multiply across. But you're most likely going to have to simplify at the end. I don't suggest this method because you're going to get very large numbers and have to do more difficult multiplication and reducing. I think the first method is better because it's usually you can do it in your head. You don't have to get a calculator out to do these big multiplication things, okay? All right, so let's look at some examples. So here's our first example, 24 over 15 times 10 over 9. Even though these are both improper fractions, do not make them mixed fractions. We want improper fractions instead of mixed fractions when we're multiplying and dividing fractions. Mixed fractions are not going to be a big deal in algebra. You should know how to do them, but we're not going to use them very much. It's actually more efficient to use improper fractions for most of our problems. Okay, so I'm going to show you the first method where we're going to cross cancel or simplify and then multiply across. Also remember that this dot means to multiply. We're not going to really use the X anymore. It's either going to be the dot or parentheses. So I see 24 and I think what goes into 24? 2, 12, 3, 3. 3 goes into 24 and 3 also goes into 9, which is diagonal from it. So I'm going to cross out the 24 and I'm going to say, okay, 3 goes into 24 8 times. And 3 goes into 9 3 times. Okay, what else can we do? 10 and 15 have a common factor of 5. So 5 goes into 10 twice, and 5 goes into 15 3 times. It's just a coincidence here that the denominators happen to be the same. It doesn't matter. Okay. Now, I think I've canceled everything I possibly can, so I'm just going to multiply across. I'm going to do 8 times 2, which is 16. That's my new numerator. And 3 times 3 gives me 9. Okay, let's try another one. All right, for this one we have 36 over 42 times 49 over 16. So I showed you cross canceling in the last one. You can also just reduce up and down. So what I mean by that here is we have, look at the 36 and the 42. What goes into 36 that also goes into 42? Try to find the biggest one. If you said 2, you can go bigger. Okay? 36 is 6 times 6, and 42 is 7 times 6. So if you found the 6, that's going to be better. You can still do it with 2, but it might take you an extra couple of steps. So 36 divided by 6 is 6. 42 divided by 6 is 7. What else can we do here? Let's see. I see 7 goes into 49 7 times. Now what happens to this 7 over here? It kind of just turns into a 1 if it completely cancels out. Let's see. We also have 16 and 6 diagonally from each other. Those can be divisible by 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 16 divided by 2 is 8. All right, I think I've done everything I've got. I've got a 3 and a 7 and an 8. So the 3 and the 7 are going to multiply to give me 21. Now here you could say 1 times 8, or you could just say that all that's left was an 8. 21 eighths. All right, our last one here is dividing fractions. Dividing fractions is really just one step and then turning it into multiplication. You may have heard of something called keep, change, flip. So let's review what that is. Keep, change, flip. Keep means you keep the first fraction the same. Keep the first fraction the same. Change means we're going to change the division to multiplication. Okay? Division to multiplication. That's division to multiplication. And flip means we're going to take the reciprocal of the second fraction, which means flip it over. All right, let's look at some examples. Okay, so here we have 25 over 40 divided by 7 over 32. So the first step we need to do is do the keep, change, flip. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite it as 25 over 40, keep it the same, times, so division became multiplication, 32 over 7. So this is the one that flips. And now we just do what we just practiced with the multiplication. Okay? I'm going to look for common things. So 32 and 40 are both even. The one's diagonal there. In fact, 4 goes into both of them. 4 goes into 40 10 times. And 4 goes into 32 8 times. I also noticed that 25 and 10 have a 5 in common. So I'm going to divide this by 5 to get 5 and divide 10 by 5 to get 2. Then from there, I'm just going to multiply across 5 times 8. Oh, I missed something. I just realized the 2 can actually cancel into the 8 4 times. All right, so now I have 5 times 4, which is 20. And all I have left in the denominator, because these all canceled, is 7. Okay, the second page here is for you to describe the steps in words. I want you to write out in words, practice writing in math, okay? How do you solve these 4 questions? Okay, describe it in complete sentences how to solve it. You can give specific steps and instructions as if you were helping a friend to learn how to do it. There's 4 questions, okay? And then I want you to summarize what you learned about fraction operations. All right, and that's it.